When Elizabeth crossed the creek that October morning in 1867, she never imagined that a chance encounter with a Lakota warrior would force her to choose between the safety of her father's boundaries and the dangerous freedom of her own heart. In the vast Nebraska Territory where cultures clash and survival depends on staying within the lines, one forbidden friendship will challenge everything she believed about love, loyalty, and what it truly means to be free. But when her father arrives with a loaded rifle, will Elizabeth find the courage to cross the final boundary that separates her old life from her true destiny? The scream pierced the morning air like a knife through butter. Elizabeth's eyes flew open as her father's voice boomed from outside their tiny dirt house. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She jumped from her straw bed and ran to the small window. Her heart nearly stopped. 3 of their chickens lay scattered across the yard like broken toys. Feathers drifted in the cold October wind. Blood stained the frozen ground. "Wolves got them," her father muttered, kicking at the mess with his worn boot. "Should have fixed that fence weeks ago." Elizabeth pulled her thin dress over her nightgown and stepped outside. The Nebraska Territory morning bit at her skin like tiny needles. The year was 1867, and winter came early on the prairie. Their small homestead sat alone for miles, surrounded by nothing but endless grass that stretched to the horizon. "Pa, we only have 2 chickens left," she said quietly. Her breath made small white clouds in the air. Her father's face grew hard. "I know what we have, girl. Don't need you telling me." Elizabeth bit her tongue. They couldn't afford to lose any more animals. The chickens gave them eggs. Without eggs, they'd have even less food to last through the cold months ahead. Her stomach already growled most nights before sleep came. She bent down to gather the scattered feathers. Her fingers found something strange. A small piece of carved wood, no bigger than her thumb. It looked like a tiny bird, with its wings spread wide. The carving was smooth and beautiful, unlike anything her father could make with his rough hands. "Pa, look at this." She held up the wooden bird. Her father snatched it from her palm. His eyes grew narrow as he studied the delicate work. Where did this come from? It was here with the chickens. Maybe whoever killed them dropped it. "Whoever?" Her father's voice rose. "Elizabeth, wolves don't carry carved trinkets. This is Indian work." The word hung in the air between them like smoke from their chimney. Indians. Elizabeth had heard the stories from other settlers. Some said they were bloodthirsty savages who scalped women and children. Others whispered that some tribes helped travelers lost on the prairie. She didn't know what to believe. "You stay close to the house today," her father ordered. "Don't go wandering like you usually do." Elizabeth nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the creek that ran along the edge of their property. She loved that spot. The water sang over the rocks, and wildflowers grew along its banks, even as autumn took hold. It was the only beautiful place in their hard life. Her father stomped back toward the house, muttering under his breath about building higher fences and keeping his rifle closer. Elizabeth lingered in the yard, turning the wooden bird over in her palm. Who had carved something so lovely? And why leave it here? The morning chores pulled her from her thoughts. She gathered eggs from their 2 remaining hens, only 3 eggs today. She drew water from their well, the rope rough against her palms. She split kindling for their small stove, each swing of the axe sending shocks up her arms. As she worked, Elizabeth's mind kept returning to the wooden bird. The person who made it had gentle hands and a patient heart. How could such a person harm their chickens? Maybe the wolves really had killed them, and someone else had simply passed by afterward. By midday, the sun warmed the air enough for Elizabeth to remove her heavy shawl. She found herself drawn again and again toward the creek. Her father had gone to check their fence posts on the far side of their land. Surely a quick walk to the water wouldn't hurt. The creek bubbled and laughed as it always did. Elizabeth sat on a fallen log and pulled off her shoes to dip her toes in the cold water. The wooden bird sat in her lap, catching the sunlight. She traced its tiny wings with one finger. "You're beautiful," she whispered to it. "Whoever made you Must have loved birds very much. A twig snapped behind her. Elizabeth spun around, her heart hammering. A young man stood at the edge of the trees, so still she almost missed him. He had long black hair that hung past his shoulders and skin the color of oak bark. Feathers decorated his hair, and his clothes were made of soft-looking leather covered in colorful beads. He was Indian, and he was watching her. Elizabeth's first instinct was to run screaming back to the house. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind, but something stopped her. The young man's eyes held no anger or threat. He looked curious, even gentle. His hands hung open at his sides, holding no weapons. "Hello," he said in clear English. His voice was quiet and calm. Elizabeth clutched the wooden bird tighter. Did you make this?" He stepped closer, moving slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Yes, I carved it for my sister, but she has gone to the spirit world. I thought someone else should have it." "Your sister died?" Elizabeth's fear began to melt into sympathy. "Last winter, the spotted sickness." His eyes grew sad. "She loved to watch birds. Said they were free to go wherever they wished." Elizabeth looked down at the tiny carved creature. It wasn't just beautiful. It was a gift made with love and given in memory. "I'm sorry about your sister." The young man smiled slightly. "She would like that you found it. She always said white girls needed to learn about freedom too." "What do you mean?" "I have watched you from across the creek. You sit by the water and look toward the hills like a caged bird watching the sky." He tilted his head. "Why do you look so sad?" No one had ever asked Elizabeth that question. Not her father, not the few neighbors who lived miles away, not even herself really. But sitting here with this stranger who spoke so kindly, the answer came easily. "I feel trapped. Every day is the same. Cook, clean, gather eggs, split wood. Pa says this is all women are good for, but sometimes I dream about seeing what's beyond those hills." The young man nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "My grandmother says dreams are gifts from the spirits. They show us what our hearts truly want." "Your grandmother sounds wise. What's your name?" "I am called Mahpia. It means skywalker in your language." He gestured toward himself, then toward her. "And you?" "Elizabeth." She stood up, still holding the wooden bird. "But I should go. My pa will be angry if he finds me talking to you." "To an Indian," Mahpia said without any hurt in his voice, just understanding. "He's afraid. All the settlers are. They tell stories about raids and killings." Mahpia's expression grew serious. "Some stories are true. There has been much blood on both sides. But not all of my people want war. And not all white settlers are our enemies." He looked directly at her. "What do you think, Elizabeth?" She studied his face, the kind eyes, the patient way he waited for her answer, the sadness when he spoke of his sister. This was not the savage monster from her father's warnings. This was someone who carved beautiful things and missed his family. "I think," she said slowly, "that you don't seem dangerous to me, and you do not seem like the other settlers to me." Mahpia smiled again. "Perhaps we are both different from what people expect." A shout echoed across the prairie. Elizabeth's father calling her name, his voice sharp with worry. She tucked the wooden bird into her apron pocket and grabbed her shoes. "I have to go," she said quickly. "But thank you. For the bird. For talking to me, like I matter." "You do matter, Elizabeth." Mahpia was already backing toward the trees. "Remember what my sister said about birds. They are free to go wherever they wish. Even caged birds remember how to fly." He disappeared into the forest like morning mist. Elizabeth ran toward her father's voice, her heart racing with excitement and fear. She had just done the most forbidden thing possible, talked with an Indian. But instead of feeling afraid, she felt more alive than she had in months. Her father appeared over the small hill, his face red with worry and anger. "Elizabeth, where have you been? I've been calling for 10 minutes. "Just getting water, Pa. The bucket's right there." She pointed to where she'd left it by the creek. He studied her flushed face suspiciously. "You look strange. Your cheeks are all pink." It's just the cold air. Elizabeth picked up the water bucket, hoping he couldn't hear how fast her heart was beating. As they walked back to the house together, Elizabeth's hand found the wooden bird in her pocket. Mahpia's words echoed in her mind. Even caged birds remember how to fly. For the first time in her 17 years, Elizabeth began to wonder what it might feel like to spread her wings. The next morning started with thunder, but no rain fell from the gray sky. Elizabeth woke to the sound and realized it wasn't a storm at all. Horses, lots of them, moving fast across the hard ground. She pressed her face to the small window and saw a cloud of dust approaching from the east. As it grew closer, she could make out the shapes of men on horseback, soldiers, by the look of their dark blue uniform. Her father was already outside, standing in front of their house with his rifle across his chest. "Stay inside," he called to her without turning around. Elizabeth pulled on her dress and boots as quickly as she could. Something about the way her father held himself told her this visit would bring trouble. She cracked open the wooden door just enough to hear the conversation. The lead soldier was a tall man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. His horse snorted and stamped, eager to keep moving. Behind him, 5 other mounted men waited with their hands resting on their weapons. "Morning," the officer said, though his tone held no friendliness. "I'm Captain Morrison from Fort Kearney. We're tracking a band of hostile Indians reported in this area. Have you seen any signs of them?" Elizabeth's heart jumped. Were they talking about Mahpia? Was he part of some war party that would hurt people? Her hand moved to the wooden bird hidden in her apron pocket. "Can't say that I have, Captain," her father replied carefully. "Though something killed 3 of our chickens yesterday morning. Could have been wolves, or could have been something else." Captain Morrison's eyes sharpened. "Show me." Her father led the soldiers to where the chicken remains still lay scattered. Elizabeth watched through the crack in the door as the men dismounted and studied the ground. One soldier, younger than the others with bright red hair, bent down and picked up some of the feathers. "These birds weren't killed by wolves, sir," he said. "Look at the way they're arranged, and the cuts are too clean. This was done with a knife." "Indian work," another soldier muttered. "They probably took the meat for food." Elizabeth frowned. That didn't make sense. If someone wanted food, why leave most of the chickens behind? And why arrange the feathers in such a neat pattern? Unless... Her breath caught as understanding hit her. The feathers weren't scattered randomly. They formed a rough circle around the spot where she'd found the wooden bird. Someone had left her a message, not committed a violent act. "We'll need to search your property," Captain Morrison announced, "and question your daughter. Indians sometimes try to make contact with young women. They think they're easier to trick." Elizabeth's father stiffened. "My daughter doesn't know anything about Indians, Captain. I keep her close to home." "All the same, I'd like to speak with her." There was no way to avoid it. Elizabeth stepped outside, trying to look calm and innocent. The soldier's eyes followed her every movement as she joined her father in the yard. "Miss," Captain Morrison said with a tip of his hat that seemed more like a threat than politeness, "I need to ask you some questions about what happened here yesterday." "Yes, sir. Did you see or hear anything unusual? Any strange sounds from the animals? Anyone watching the house?" Elizabeth's mouth went dry. If she told the truth about meeting Mahpia, the soldiers would hunt him down. But if she lied and they found out later, both she and her father could face serious punishment. "I heard the chickens making noise early in the morning," she said carefully. "That's what woke me up. But by the time I got outside, they were already like this." It wasn't exactly a lie. She had heard chicken sounds that morning, though she now suspected they came from whatever arrangement of the scene Mahpia had created. "And you didn't see anyone? Not even from a distance?" Elizabeth shook her head, hoping the gesture looked more confident than she felt. The red-haired soldier spoke up. "Captain, there are tracks leading toward the creek. Horse prints, but also footprints. Someone definitely came through here." Morrison's expression grew darker. "How many people?" "Hard to say, sir. The ground's pretty torn up. But at least 2, maybe 3. Elizabeth's confusion deepened. Mahpia had been on foot when she met him, not on horseback. And he'd been alone. Either the soldier was wrong about the tracks, or something else was happening here. We're going to follow these tracks, Morrison decided. You two stay here and keep watch on the house. If any Indians show up, fire 3 shots in the air. We'll come running. 2 soldiers remained behind as the others rode toward the creek. Elizabeth and her father were essentially prisoners in their own home. They sat on wooden crates outside their door, the guard's eyes never leaving them. This is bad, her father muttered under his breath. If there really are hostiles in the area, we're sitting ducks out here. Elizabeth wanted to defend Mahpia, to explain that not all Indians were hostile, but she couldn't do that without revealing their meeting. Instead, she watched the dust clouds by the creek, where the soldiers searched for signs of the people who'd visited their homestead. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed higher, and Elizabeth grew more nervous with each passing minute. What if the soldiers found some trace of Mahpia? What if they captured him and brought him back here? She'd have to watch them arrest someone who'd shown her nothing but kindness. Finally, the sound of returning horses broke the tense silence. Captain Morrison and his men rode back, looking frustrated and angry. They'd found nothing useful. Tracks disappear at the creek, Morrison reported to his remaining soldiers. Whoever was here knew how to cover their trail in the water. He turned to Elizabeth's father. I'm leaving 2 men here for the next few days. If these Indians come back, my soldiers will be ready for them. That's very kind, Captain, but we don't have room or food for extra people, her father protested. They'll make camp outside and provide their own supplies. This isn't a request, it's military necessity. Morrison mounted his horse again. Miss, if you remember anything else about yesterday morning, you tell Sergeant Hayes immediately. Even the smallest detail could be important. After Morrison and the other soldiers left, Elizabeth found herself under constant watch by the 2 remaining guards. Sergeant Hayes was a grizzled man with gray whiskers and suspicious eyes. His companion, the red-haired soldier called Private Bennett, seemed younger and less threatening, but he followed orders without question. The presence of the soldiers changed everything about Elizabeth's daily routine. She couldn't walk freely around their property anymore. She couldn't visit the creek where she'd met Mahpia. She couldn't even step outside without one of the guards watching her every move. That evening, as Elizabeth helped prepare their meager supper, she overheard Sergeant Hayes talking quietly with her father. I've seen this kind of thing before, Hayes was saying. Indians will scout a homestead for days, watching the family's patterns. Then they'll make some kind of contact with the weakest member, usually a woman or child. They pretend to be friendly, gain trust, and then use that person to get information about defenses and supplies. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she sliced their small portion of bread. Was that what Mahpia had done? Had their entire conversation been some kind of trick to gather information about her family's weaknesses? My Elizabeth's got more sense than that, her father replied, but his voice held doubt. She wouldn't talk to strangers, especially not Indians. I hope you're right, Hayes said, but young women can be fooled by a handsome face and smooth words. I've seen it happen before. Always ends badly. As Elizabeth served the soldiers their food, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Everything about her meeting with Mahpia had felt genuine. His sadness about his sister, his gentleness with the carved bird, his understanding of her loneliness. But what if the soldiers were right? What if she'd been naive and foolish? That night, Elizabeth lay in her bed listening to the guards talking quietly by their campfire outside. She pulled the wooden bird from under her pillow and held it up to catch the moonlight streaming through her window. The tiny carved wings seemed to shimmer in the pale light. If Mahpia had wanted to hurt her family, he could have done it when she was alone and defenseless by the creek. Instead, he'd given her something beautiful and spoken to her with respect and kindness. That had to mean something, didn't it? But doubt crept into her thoughts like cold air through the cracks in their sod walls. Maybe she was just a lonely girl, desperate for someone to treat her as more than a servant. Maybe she'd imagined the kindness in Mahpia's eyes, because she wanted so badly to believe that someone cared about her dreams and feelings. Outside, one of the soldiers coughed, and Elizabeth quickly hid the wooden bird back under her pillow. If they discovered it, they'd know immediately that she'd lied about not seeing any Indians. The thought of what might happen then made her stomach twist with fear. As sleep finally took her, Elizabeth's dreams were filled with birds trying to fly with broken wings, and voices calling warnings that came too late to save anyone. The wooden bird was gone. Elizabeth's hands shook as she searched under her pillow for the third time. She'd hidden it there before sleep, but now only rough straw and worn fabric met her fingers. Someone had taken it while she slept. Panic shot through her chest like lightning. If the soldiers had found the carved bird, they'd know she'd lied about meeting Mahpia. Her father would be furious. She might even be arrested for helping the enemy. She dressed quickly and crept to the window. Outside, Sergeant Hayes and Private Bennett sat by their dying campfire, drinking coffee from tin cups. They looked tired, but alert. Had one of them searched her room during the night? "Elizabeth!" Her father's voice boomed from the main room. "Get out here, now!" This was it. They'd found the bird. Elizabeth's legs felt weak as she walked toward her father's angry voice. But when she entered the room, she saw something that confused her even more. Her father stood holding a different wooden carving, a small horse with a flowing mane. It was just as beautiful as the bird had been, carved with the same gentle hands. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. I don't know, Pa." The truth was, she really didn't know. This wasn't the bird Mahpia had given her. "I found it on our doorstep this morning. Someone left it there during the night." Her father's eyes burned with suspicion. Right under the noses of two armed soldiers. Elizabeth stared at the wooden horse. Someone had been close enough to their house to leave a gift without being detected by the guards. That took incredible skill and courage. But who would take such a risk? Sergeant Hayes burst through the door, his rifle ready. "What's all the shouting about?" Her father held up the carved horse. "Someone visited us last night. Left this right outside our door." The sergeant's face went pale. He'd been responsible for keeping watch, and someone had slipped past him. "That's impossible. Bennett and I took turns staying awake. Nobody came near this house." "Then how do you explain this?" Her father shoved the carving toward Hayes. Private Bennett appeared in the doorway, looking worried. "Sergeant, I found something else. Tracks in the soft dirt by the well. Small moccasin prints. Fresh ones." Elizabeth's heart hammered. Mahpia had been here. But why risk coming so close to the soldiers? And why leave a different carving instead of returning her bird? "This changes everything," Hayes muttered. "If they can get past trained sentries without being seen, they're more dangerous than we thought." He turned to Elizabeth's father. "Pack your essential belongings. We're taking you and your daughter to Fort Kearney for protection." "Leave our homestead?" Her father's voice cracked. "This land is all we have. If we abandon it, someone else will claim it. Better to lose land than lose your lives." Hayes replied grimly. "These Indians are playing games with us. First, the chicken arrangement. Now this midnight visit. They're testing our defenses, planning something bigger." Elizabeth wanted to argue that maybe Mahpia was trying to communicate, not threaten them. But she couldn't speak without revealing what she knew. The wooden horse felt warm in her hands, and she noticed something the men had missed. Tiny scratches on its base that looked like letters. While the soldiers argued with her father about evacuation plans, Elizabeth angled the horse toward the morning light coming through their window. The scratches definitely formed letters, carved so small they were almost invisible. S-A-F-E. Safe. Mahpia was trying to tell her something about safety. But safe from what? The soldiers who wanted to hunt him down? Or safe from some other danger she didn't understand yet? The debate about leaving grew louder. Her father didn't want to abandon their home, but the soldiers insisted it was too dangerous to stay. Elizabeth found herself caught between their angry voices, holding a carved message she couldn't share with anyone. "I need to get some things from the barn," she said quietly. "You're not going anywhere alone," Hayes snapped. "Bennett, go with her." The young soldier nodded and followed Elizabeth outside. The morning air felt crisp and clean after the tension inside the house. As they walked toward the small barn, Elizabeth tried to think of a way to get a moment alone to study the horse carving more carefully. "This is all very strange," Bennett said, making conversation. "In 5 years of frontier duty, I've never seen Indians behave like this. Usually, they either avoid contact completely or attack directly. This middle ground doesn't make sense." Elizabeth glanced at the red-haired soldier. He seemed genuinely puzzled, not just suspicious like his sergeant. Maybe he'd listened to a different perspective. "What if they're not planning an attack?" she asked carefully. "What if they want something else?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Maybe they're trying to communicate? Maybe they need help with something?" Bennett shook his head. "Miss, I understand you want to think the best of people, but Indians don't communicate with white settlers by leaving mysterious gifts. They use smoke signals and war parties and treaty councils. This behavior," he gestured toward the house, "this is something else entirely." Elizabeth gathered some of her mother's books from the barn, wrapping them carefully in old cloth. The carved horse sat in her apron pocket, its message burning in her mind. If they left for the fort today, she might never see Mahpia again. She might never understand what he was trying to tell her about safety. As they walked back to the house, Elizabeth noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. Fresh horse prints in the mud near their well. But these weren't from Indian ponies. These prints came from heavy military horses with metal shoes. "Bennett," she said slowly, "look at these tracks." The young soldier bent down to examine the prints. His face grew confused. "These are from cavalry horses, but we're the only military unit in this area. Could there be other soldiers around? Maybe ones you don't know about?" "No, miss. Captain Morrison coordinates all patrols from Fort Kearney. If there were other troops nearby, we'd know about it." Bennett stood up, his expression troubled. "These tracks are fresh, made sometime after the rain stopped yesterday evening." A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine. If unknown soldiers were sneaking around their homestead at night, that might explain Mahpia's warning about safety. Maybe he wasn't the threat the soldiers thought he was. Maybe he was trying to warn her about a different kind of danger. "We need to tell Sergeant Hayes about this," Bennett said, but his voice held uncertainty. "Tell him what? That there might be soldiers around that he doesn't know about? Won't that make him angry?" Bennett considered this. Military men didn't like admitting they might not have complete information about their own forces. "You're right. Let me think about how to approach this." They returned to the house to find her father and Sergeant Hayes still arguing about evacuation. The wooden horse seemed to pulse with warmth in Elizabeth's pocket, reminding her of its hidden message. Safe, but safe from whom? "We leave in 1 hour, Hayes announced when he saw them return. "Pack light. Only what you absolutely need." Elizabeth nodded, but her mind was racing with questions. Why would Mahpia risk coming so close to armed soldiers just to leave her a carved warning? What did he know about mysterious cavalry units moving around at night? And most importantly, if they left for the fort, how would she ever learn the truth about what was really happening on the Nebraska prairie? The wooden horse felt heavier in her pocket as she began gathering her few possessions. Whatever game was being played around their homestead, she was beginning to suspect that the soldiers and the settlers might not be the only players involved. The wagon wheels hit every rock and hole in the rough trail to Fort Kearney. Elizabeth bounced on the hard wooden seat, her small bundle of belongings clutched in her lap. The carved horse pressed against her leg through the fabric of her apron, a constant reminder of the message she couldn't share. Her father rode beside the wagon on their old plow horse, his rifle across his knees. Sergeant Hayes and Private Bennett flanked them on both sides, their eyes constantly scanning the endless grass for signs of trouble. They'd been traveling for 3 hours, and Elizabeth's back ached from the jolting ride. "How much further?" her father called to Hayes. "Another 2 hours, maybe 3, the sergeant replied. "Depends on how many creek crossings we hit." Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. The longer they traveled, the further she moved from any chance of seeing Mahpia again. Part of her felt guilty for caring about that when her family might be in real danger. But another part of her couldn't stop thinking about his gentle voice and the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his sister. Private Bennett rode closer to the wagon. "Miss, you look pale. Are you feeling sick from the bumping?" "I'm fine," Elizabeth lied. The truth was, her stomach churned with worry about leaving behind the one person who'd ever treated her as more than just a farm helper. "Don't worry," Bennett said kindly. "Fort Kearny is safe. Solid walls, plenty of soldiers, good food. You'll be comfortable there until this Indian trouble passes." But what if the Indian trouble wasn't what they thought it was? Elizabeth's fingers found the carved horse through her apron. The word safe seemed to mock her now. Safe from what? Safe where? A shout from behind made everyone turn. Another rider approached fast, dust streaming from his horse's hooves. As he got closer, Elizabeth could see the dark blue uniform of another cavalry soldier. "Message from Captain Morrison," the rider called as he pulled up beside their group. Sergeant Hayes reached for the folded paper. His face grew grim as he read the contents. "There's been a change of plans," he announced. "What kind of change?" Elizabeth's father demanded. "Captain Morrison wants us to take you to the trading post at Willow Creek instead of the fort. Says it's closer and just as safe." Elizabeth had never heard of Willow Creek, but something about the sudden change made her nervous. Why would they alter their destination when they were already more than halfway to Fort Kearny? "I don't like it," her father said bluntly. "We were told the fort was the safest place. Now suddenly we're going somewhere else?" The messenger spoke up. "Sir, I'm just delivering orders. Captain Morrison says hostile Indians have been spotted near the fort. The trading post is in the opposite direction, away from the trouble." That made sense, Elizabeth supposed. But the carved horse in her pocket seemed to grow warmer, as if trying to remind her of something important. They changed direction, heading northwest instead of northeast. The landscape began to look different. More trees, rolling hills instead of flat prairie. Elizabeth had never been this far from home before. Everything felt strange and uncertain. As they traveled, she noticed that Private Bennett kept looking back over his shoulder, as if expecting to see something following them. When she asked him about it, he just shrugged. "Old habit," he said. "Always good to know what's behind you on the frontier." But Elizabeth saw the worried lines around his eyes. Bennett was more concerned than he wanted to admit. The sun was getting low when they finally reached Willow Creek. Elizabeth expected to see a bustling trading post with other travelers and merchants. Instead, she found a small collection of rough wooden buildings that looked almost abandoned. "This doesn't look right," her father muttered. Sergeant Hayes dismounted and approached the largest building. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He tried the handle. Locked. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone here? We're looking for the trading post." A man emerged from behind one of the smaller buildings. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and nervous eyes. His clothes looked expensive but dirty, as if he'd been traveling hard. "You're the folks from the homestead," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right," Hayes replied. "Captain Morrison sent us here for protection. Are you the trader?" The man laughed, but the sound held no humor. "I'm many things. Come inside. We need to talk." Something about his tone made Elizabeth's skin crawl. She caught Private Bennett's eye and saw her own uneasiness reflected there. They were led into the main building, which smelled of old smoke and something else Elizabeth couldn't identify. The furniture was rough and mismatched. Maps covered one wall, marked with red lines and symbols she didn't recognize. "Sit down," the pale man ordered. It sounded more like a command than an invitation. Her father remained standing. "Where's the trader? Where are the other people? This place looks deserted." "The trader is away on business." The man's smile was cold. "As for other people, well, sometimes it's better to keep things quiet out here on the frontier." Sergeant Hayes's hand moved toward his weapon. "I think there's been some confusion. We're supposed to be under military protection here." "Oh, you are," the pale man assured him. just not the kind you were expecting. Before anyone could react, armed men stepped out from behind curtains and doorways. They wore bits and pieces of military uniforms. But something was wrong. Their clothes were too clean for frontier soldiers, and their weapons looked new and expensive. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she realized they'd been led into a trap. But by whom? And why? "What do you want?" her father demanded. The pale man sat down across from them, his cold smile never wavering. "Information about the Indians you've been in contact with." "We haven't been in contact with any Indians," Elizabeth's father protested. "Really?" The man pulled out a familiar object, Elizabeth's wooden bird carving. "Then how do you explain this? My men found it hidden in your daughter's room." Elizabeth's blood turned to ice. These weren't soldiers at all. They were something else. People who had searched their home and stolen from her. But who were they working for? "That proves nothing," Sergeant Hayes said. But his voice lacked confidence. "Doesn't it?" The pale man turned the carved bird in his fingers. "This is Lakota work. Very specific style. Made by someone with considerable skill." His eyes fixed on Elizabeth. "Someone who cared enough about you to create something beautiful." Elizabeth forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Whatever these people wanted, she wouldn't give them information that could hurt Mahpia. "I found it," she said simply. "In our chicken yard. Someone must have dropped it." "Ah, but that's not true, is it?" The man leaned forward. "Because my sources tell me you've been meeting secretly with a young Lakota brave, having long conversations by the creek, growing quite fond of each other." Elizabeth's world tilted sideways. How could this stranger know about her private moments with Mahpia, who had been watching them? "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. The pale man chuckled. "Miss, I have people everywhere. People who see things. People who report back to me." He stood up and walked to the wall of maps. "Your Indian friend has information I need, about his tribe's plans, about where they're hiding their winter supplies, about which routes they use to avoid army patrols." Elizabeth finally understood. These weren't random criminals, or even rogue soldiers. They were men who profited from conflict between settlers and Indians, arms dealers maybe, or people who sold information to both sides of the fighting. "And you think," she said slowly, "that he'll give you this information to protect me?" "Very good." The pale man clapped his hands mockingly. "You're smarter than you look." "Yes, that's exactly what I think. Young love makes people do foolish things." Elizabeth's father made a strangled sound of rage and disbelief. "My daughter isn't involved with any Indian. She's a good Christian girl." "Your daughter," the pale man said coldly, "is the key to ending the Indian problem in this territory once and for all. When her brave comes to rescue her, and he will come, we'll be ready for him." The wooden bird seemed to burn in the man's fingers as Elizabeth realized the full scope of the trap being laid. Not just for her, but for Mahpia and possibly his entire band. And she was the bait. The rope burned Elizabeth's wrists as she twisted against the wooden post. 3 hours had passed since the pale man's thugs had tied her up in the abandoned barn behind the fake trading post. Her father and the 2 real soldiers sat bound nearby, their faces grim with helpless anger. "This is insane," Sergeant Hayes muttered for the 10th time. "When Captain Morrison finds out what happened to us, Captain Morrison isn't coming." Private Bennett interrupted bitterly. "Don't you see? That messenger who changed our destination? He wasn't from the fort at all. These criminals have been planning this for days." Elizabeth's mind raced as she listened to the men argue. The pale man had made one crucial mistake when he'd bragged about having people everywhere. He'd revealed that someone had been watching her meetings with Mahpia from the very beginning. But who? And why wait until now to spring their trap? A soft sound outside made everyone freeze. Footsteps in the grass, light and careful. Elizabeth's heart leaped with hope and terror. If Mahpia had come to rescue her, he'd be walking straight into the arms of a dozen armed men. The barn door creaked open just wide enough for a shadow to slip inside. But instead of Mahpia, an elderly Lakota woman entered, moving with surprising speed despite her age. She pressed a finger to her lips for silence and began cutting Elizabeth's ropes with a sharp knife. "Grandmother?" Elizabeth whispered, recognizing her from Mahpia's description. "Shh, child. We must hurry." The old woman's English was heavily accented but clear. "Bad men wait in woods. They think my grandson will come alone and foolish." "Where is Mahpia?" Elizabeth asked as feeling returned to her freed hands. The grandmother smiled grimly as she moved to untie the soldiers. "Learning patience. I told him rushing in like angry bear will save no one. Better to be clever like Coyote." Sergeant Hayes rubbed his raw wrists gratefully. "Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening here, but we need to get these folks to safety." "Safety comes after truth," the old woman replied cryptically. She moved to the small window and peered through a crack in the wood. "Elizabeth, child, you have been living in middle of great lie. Time you learned what is real." Before Elizabeth could ask what she meant, voices echoed from outside. The pale man was giving orders to his thugs, positioning them around the clearing in preparation for Mahpia's expected arrival. "There!" one of them called out. "Movement in the trees to the north!" Elizabeth's heart sank. Had Mahpia ignored his grandmother's advice and come charging in anyway? But the old woman chuckled softly. "Good boy. Right on time." "Time for what?" Elizabeth's father demanded. "Time for real soldiers to arrive," the grandmother said simply. Confusion washed over Elizabeth until she heard it. The thunder of many horses approaching fast. But these weren't Indian ponies. These were heavy cavalry mounts, and they were coming from 3 different directions at once. Shouts erupted outside as the pale man's thugs realized they were surrounded. "It's a trap!" someone yelled. "Real army troops!" Through the window, Elizabeth watched in amazement as uniformed soldiers charged into the clearing. These were genuine cavalry officers, not the fake ones who'd led them into this mess. At their head rode Captain Morrison himself, his sword drawn and his face set in furious determination. "Surrender now!" Morrison's voice boomed across the clearing. "You're surrounded and outnumbered." The pale man stepped out of the main building, his hands raised but his expression defiant. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding. We were holding these people for their own protection." "Protection?" Morrison spurred his horse closer. "From what I've been told, you kidnapped them using forged military orders and fake soldiers. That's not protection. That's a federal crime." Elizabeth stared through the crack in the barn wall, trying to understand how the real army had found them. Then she saw him, Mahpia, emerging from the tree line on foot, walking calmly beside Captain Morrison's horse as if they were old friends. "I don't understand," she whispered to the grandmother. "How does Mahpia know the army captain?" The old woman's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Many things you do not understand, child. My grandson is not just any young warrior. He works as scout and translator for army, has been keeping peace between soldiers and our people for 2 years." Elizabeth's world shifted completely. Mahpia wasn't some random brave who might be hostile to settlers. He was actively working to prevent conflicts between Indians and whites. All her father's fears, all the soldiers' suspicions about dangerous Indians, none of it applied to the man who'd shown her such kindness. "But why didn't he tell me?" she asked. "Would your father have believed you if you said you were friends with Army Scout?" the grandmother asked gently. "Or would he have thought you were lying to protect dangerous savage?" Elizabeth knew the answer. Her father would never have listened to explanations about good Indians and bad Indians. In his mind, they were all the same threat. Outside, the pale man's thugs were being rounded up and disarmed. Elizabeth could see the fake Private Bennett among them. The red-haired man who'd seemed so young and friendly was actually one of the criminals. Bennett was working with them the whole time, she realized aloud. "Smart girl," the grandmother nodded. "He told bad men about your friendship with grandson, made them think they could use you as bait." Sergeant Hayes, the real soldier, overheard this, and his face darkened with rage. "That lying snake rode with us for 3 days, pretending to be army. When I get my hands on him, you'll follow proper military justice. Captain Morrison said as he entered the barn. But first, let's make sure everyone here is unharmed. Elizabeth stood on shaky legs as the captain looked them over. Behind him, Mahpia appeared in the doorway, his eyes immediately finding hers across the dim space. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, unable to find words. Everything she'd thought she knew about their situation had been turned upside down. The real danger hadn't come from Indians at all. It had come from white criminals who wanted to start a war for their own profit. "Captain," her father said slowly, "I'm confused about something. This young man, he's Indian, but you trust him?" Morrison nodded firmly. "Mahpia has saved more lives than I can count, both white and Indian. He's warned us about raids, prevented massacres, and helped negotiate peaceful solutions to disputes. He's one of the finest scouts I've ever worked with." Elizabeth saw her father struggling to reconcile this information with everything he'd believed about Indians. The fear and hatred he'd carried for so long didn't disappear instantly, but cracks were beginning to show. "The men who took us," Elizabeth said carefully, "they wanted information about Mahpia's people, about where they camp and how they move. Information they could sell to the highest bidder," Morrison said grimly. "There are people who profit from conflict between settlers and tribes. They don't want peace. They want war. Because war means contracts for weapons, supplies, and transportation." Mahpia stepped closer to Elizabeth, his expression gentle but serious. "This is why I could not tell you everything when we first met. There are ears everywhere. People who would use any information to create trouble. But you kept meeting with me anyway," Elizabeth said, "even though it was dangerous. Some risks are worth taking," he replied simply. Elizabeth's father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Son, Mahpia, I owe you an apology, and my thanks. If you hadn't brought help, we might all be dead right now." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Elizabeth saw hope flickering in Mahpia's eyes as her father extended a hesitant hand for a handshake. The sound of chains clinking outside reminded them that justice was being served. The pale man and his criminals would face military courts for their crimes. But Elizabeth knew the real victory was smaller and more personal. Two people from different worlds had found friendship, despite the fear and hatred that surrounded them. "What happens now?" she asked. Captain Morrison answered first. "Now you go home and rebuild your lives. The real threats to your family are in custody." But Elizabeth was looking at Mahpia when she asked the question, and his answer mattered more. "Now," he said softly, "we learn what friendship looks like when it doesn't have to hide in shadows." The morning sun painted everything golden as Elizabeth walked toward the creek behind their homestead. 2 weeks had passed since the rescue at Willow Creek, and life had settled into a new rhythm that felt both familiar and completely different. Her father was rebuilding the chicken coop with stronger wood and better latches, not because he feared Indian raids anymore, but because he'd learned that real threats could come from unexpected places. The carved horse sat on their kitchen table now, no longer hidden, but displayed as a reminder that appearances could deceive. Elizabeth heard voices by the water before she saw the people. Mahpia sat on the fallen log where they'd first talked, but he wasn't alone. Captain Morrison stood nearby. Both men, studying a hand-drawn map spread between them. "The winter camps will need extra supplies," Morrison was saying. "If this cold spell continues, both settler families and Indian bands could face real hardship. My grandmother says the signs point to harsh weather until spring," Mahpia replied. "But if the fort could spare some blankets and preserved meat, our people would share fresh game and knowledge of which plants stay good through snow." Elizabeth approached quietly, fascinated by this glimpse into the work Mahpia did as a scout. He wasn't just translating words between two languages. He was building bridges between two completely different ways of life. "Miss Elizabeth," Captain Morrison said, touching his hat politely, "your timing is perfect. Mahpia tells me you can read and write better than most adults. We could use someone to help record the agreements we're making with local tribes." The request surprised her. "You want me to help with official army business?" "Unofficial business," Morrison corrected with a smile. The kind of quiet diplomacy that prevents wars instead of starting them. Elizabeth looked at Machpia, who nodded encouragingly. Your words would help both sides understand each other better. Peace needs people who can see beyond old fears. The idea thrilled and terrified her equally. Working as a translator and record keeper would give her a real purpose beyond cooking and cleaning, but it would also mean openly associating with Indians, something that would shock their few neighbors. I'd like to try, she said finally. Good. Morrison folded the map. I'll speak with your father about it. Given what happened with those criminals, I think he's beginning to understand that the real world is more complicated than anyone wants to admit. After the captain left, Elizabeth and Machpia sat together by the creek in comfortable silence. The water sang the same song it always had, but Elizabeth heard different meanings in it now. Instead of dreaming about escape, she found herself planning how to build something better right here. You're different, Machpia observed. Calmer, like bird who has decided where to make her nest. I feel different. For the first time in my life, I have work that matters. Something beyond just surviving each day. Machpia picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. My grandmother would say the spirits led you to this path. But I think you chose it yourself, when you decided to see me as a person instead of just an enemy. Your grandmother is very wise, Elizabeth said. I'd like to learn more from her. She would like that. She says white women need to remember the old ways of healing and plant medicine. Too many settlers die from simple sicknesses because they don't know which roots and leaves can help. They talked for another hour about practical things. The coming winter, the work they do together, the slow process of changing minds on both sides of the cultural divide. But underneath the everyday conversation, Elizabeth felt something deeper growing between them. Not the desperate romance of forbidden love, but the steady foundation of true partnership. When she returned home, Elizabeth found her father sitting at their small table with a cup of coffee and a troubled expression. Pa? Is everything all right? He looked up at her with eyes that held both sadness and determination. Elizabeth, we need to talk about your future. Her heart sank. Had he changed his mind about letting her work with Captain Morrison? Had the neighbors convinced him that associating with Indians would bring shame on their family? Sit down, he said gently. She took the chair across from him, bracing herself for disappointment. I've been thinking about your mother, he began unexpectedly. About the dreams she had for you. She wanted you to have choices, opportunities, beyond what this hard land could offer. Elizabeth waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. I was wrong to try and keep you so sheltered, he continued. Wrong to think that fear could protect you better than knowledge. What happened with those criminals? It showed me that danger comes from places I never expected, while help came from people I'd been taught to mistrust. Relief flooded through her. Pa, I know it's hard to change how you think about things. It is hard, he agreed, but not as hard as watching my daughter hide her true self because she's afraid of disappointing me. He reached across the table and took her hand. Captain Morrison told me about the translation work, about how much they need someone with your skills and judgment. And I think your mother would be proud to see you using your education to build peace instead of walls. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. Really? Really? Her father squeezed her hand. But I have one condition. Here it comes, she thought. The catch that would limit her freedom after all. I want you to teach me some of what you learn, he said, about their customs, their language, their way of seeing the world. If my daughter is going to be working between two peoples, then I want to understand both sides too. Elizabeth stared at him in amazement. This was more than acceptance. This was active support for her new path. I'd love to teach you, Pa. Machpia says his grandmother would be happy to share her knowledge with anyone who approaches with respect. Her father nodded slowly. Then I guess it's time this old dog learned some new tricks. That evening, as Elizabeth prepared their supper, she found herself humming a tune she'd heard Machpia sing by the creek. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the prairie with pristine white. But inside their warm home, something even more precious was taking root. The kind of understanding that could bridge any divide, if people were brave enough to build it together. The carved horse on their table caught the lamplight, its tiny wooden mane seeming to flow with life and possibility. Elizabeth smiled as she remembered Mahpia's words about birds finding their own sky. She'd found something even better. She'd found a place where she could help others learn to fly. The letter arrived with blood on its edges. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she opened the envelope that a breathless messenger had delivered to their homestead. Inside, Captain Morrison's usually neat handwriting looked rushed and desperate. "Elizabeth, need you at Fort Kearney immediately. Bring Mahpia if you can find him. Situation critical. Lives depend on your translation skills. Morrison." Her father looked up from mending harness leather, his face creased with worry. "What does it say?" "The captain needs me at the fort. Something's gone wrong." Elizabeth was already moving toward her coat. "Pa, I have to go." "In this weather?" "Elizabeth, look outside. That's not just snow. That's a blizzard starting." Through their small window, Elizabeth could see the wind whipping white across the prairie. The storm had been building all morning, and now it looked ready to unleash its full fury. But something in Morrison's letter suggested that waiting wasn't an option. "I'll take the horse and follow the creek bed. It'll give me shelter from the worst wind." Her father stood up, his decision already made. "If you're going, then I'm going with you." These are the times when family sticks together. They bundled up in their warmest clothes and saddled their old plow horse. The animal snorted nervously at the driving snow, but she was steady and strong. Elizabeth tucked Morrison's letter inside her coat, close to her heart, where the urgency of it seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. The ride to Fort Kearney normally took 2 hours in good weather. In the growing blizzard, with visibility dropping by the minute, it might take twice that long. But Elizabeth kept thinking about the blood on the letter's edge. Someone was hurt, maybe dying, and they needed her skills to save lives. They hadn't ridden for more than 30 minutes when Elizabeth spotted a familiar figure struggling through the snow on foot. Mahpia emerged from the white curtain like a ghost, his usually graceful movements clumsy with exhaustion and cold. "Mahpia!" Elizabeth called out, sliding down from the horse to help him. "Elizabeth, thank the spirits you came this way." His breath made clouds in the freezing air. "There has been terrible mistake at the fort. People will die if we cannot make them understand each other." "What happened?" her father asked, offering Mahpia a hand up onto their horse. "New colonel arrived yesterday," Mahpia explained as they continued toward the fort. "Colonel Bradley from back east. He does not trust Captain Morrison's peaceful ways. This morning, he ordered attack on winter camp of peaceful Ponca tribe." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. "Attack? But those people aren't hostile. They've been trading peacefully with settlers all season." "Colonel Bradley believes all Indians are same. He says Morrison has been too soft. That only way to have peace is to make tribes afraid." Mahpia's voice was bitter with anger and frustration. "But the Ponca fought back to protect their families. Now there are wounded soldiers and wounded Indians, and both sides want revenge. And Morrison needs me to translate." Elizabeth realized, to try and stop this from turning into a real war. "More than translate," Mahpia said grimly. "The Ponca chief's daughter was shot during the fighting. She is dying, and their medicine man cannot save her. But army doctor refuses to treat Indian girl. Says his medicine is for soldiers only." Elizabeth felt sick. A child was dying because of prejudice and misunderstanding, while adults on both sides prepared for more violence. How can one person's hatred cause so much pain? "Because hatred is like prairie fire," her father said quietly. "It spreads fast and burns everything in its path, unless someone has courage to stand against it." The fort appeared through the snow, like a dark island in a white sea. Even from a distance, Elizabeth could see the tension in the place. Guards walked the walls with rifles ready, and smoke rose from too many fires, the kind of smoke that came from burning supplies in preparation for siege. Inside the fort's gates, chaos greeted them. Soldiers rushed back and forth carrying weapons and ammunition. In one corner of the courtyard, a group of Ponca people sat under guard, their faces mixing grief and fury in equal measure. And everywhere, the smell of blood and fear hung heavy in the cold air. Captain Morrison met them at the entrance to the main building. His uniform was torn and stained, his face haggard with exhaustion. "Elizabeth, thank God you came. We have maybe 2 hours before this situation explodes into full warfare." "Where's Colonel Bradley?" Elizabeth asked. "In his office, writing reports about Indian treachery and requesting more troops." Morrison's voice held barely controlled anger. "He's decided that the only solution is to force all tribes onto reservations by violence if necessary." "What about the wounded girl?" Morrison's expression grew even darker. "Dying in the stable because Bradley won't let our doctor treat her. He says showing mercy to Indians encourages rebellion." Elizabeth had heard enough. "Take me to her." "Elizabeth, if Bradley finds out you're helping Indians, he could arrest you as a traitor," Morrison warned. "Then don't let him find out," she replied simply. The stable was dark and cold, lit only by a few lanterns. Elizabeth found the Ponca girl lying on a pile of horse blankets, her parents kneeling beside her with tears streaming down their faces. The child couldn't be more than 10 years old, and she was pale with blood loss from a bullet wound in her shoulder. Elizabeth knelt beside the family, her heart breaking at the sight. "Mahpia, tell them I want to help. Ask if they'll let me try to stop the bleeding." As Mahpia translated, Elizabeth examined the wound with gentle hands. She'd learned basic medicine from her mother's books and from Mahpia's grandmother, who had taught her which plants could fight infection and how to clean injuries properly. "The bullet went through," she told Mahpia. "That's good. Nothing stuck inside. But she's lost too much blood, and infection is starting." Working quickly, Elizabeth cleaned the wound with water warmed over a lantern flame. She used strips of clean cloth to pack the injury and stop the bleeding. Then she reached into her medicine pouch for the herbs Mahpia's grandmother had given her, plants that could fight sickness and help healing. As she worked, Elizabeth became aware of voices outside the stable, growing louder and angrier. Through the wooden walls, she could hear Colonel Bradley shouting orders about preparing for battle. "They're planning to attack the Ponca village at dawn," Morrison said quietly as he slipped into the stable. "Bradley claims it's the only way to prevent future raids." "But the village is full of children and old people," Mahpia protested. "The warriors are all here, under guard or wounded. Attacking the village would be massacre, not battle." Elizabeth looked down at the injured girl, whose breathing had grown steadier as the herbs took effect. This child was someone's daughter, someone's hope for the future. In the village Bradley wanted to destroy, there were dozens more just like her. "We have to stop this," Elizabeth said firmly. "But how do we make a man like Bradley listen to reason?" Morrison shook his head hopelessly. "You can't reason with blind hatred, Elizabeth. Some people see only what they want to see." But as Elizabeth watched the Ponca parents holding their daughter's hands, speaking soft words of love and encouragement in their own language, an idea began to form in her mind. Bradley saw Indians as faceless enemies. But what if she could make him see them as people? As parents who loved their children just as much as any white family did. "Captain," she said slowly, "I think I know a way. But it's going to require all of us to be very brave." Outside the stable, the wind howled with the fury of the approaching storm. Inside, a young woman who had learned to bridge two worlds prepared to risk everything to prevent a tragedy that would stain the Nebraska Territory with innocent blood for generations to come. The confrontation came at sunrise, but not the way Colonel Bradley had planned it. Instead of leading troops out to attack the Ponca village, Bradley found himself face to face with something he hadn't expected. A 10-year-old Indian girl sitting up in his own office, very much alive, and looking at him with curious, dark eyes. Elizabeth stood beside the child's chair, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. Behind them, the child's parents waited quietly, their traditional clothes clean and dignified, despite their night in the fort's stable. "What is the meaning of this?" Bradley demanded. his face red with outrage. "I gave specific orders that no Indians were to enter this building." "Colonel," Captain Morrison said calmly, "I'd like you to meet Little Bird, daughter of Chief Standing Bear of the Ponca. The child you ordered left to die yesterday." Bradley's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. Elizabeth could see him calculating, trying to figure out how this girl had survived and what game was being played. "I don't care what her name is," he said coldly. "She's Indian, which makes her an enemy. Get her out of my office." "She's not an enemy," Elizabeth said quietly. "She's a 10-year-old girl who likes to collect pretty stones and help her grandmother cook, just like any white child you might know. Don't lecture me about Indians, young lady. I've read the reports. I know what these savages are capable of." Elizabeth had prepared for this moment all night, choosing her words carefully. "Colonel Bradley, you have a daughter back east, don't you? About this girl's age?" Bradley's expression shifted slightly. "How do you know about my family?" "Captain Morrison mentioned her once. Said you worried about her getting proper schooling while you're stationed out here." Elizabeth stepped closer to Bradley's desk. "What would you want someone to do if your daughter was shot and bleeding? Would you want them to leave her to die because of the color of her skin? That's completely different." "Is it?" Elizabeth interrupted. "Little Bird's mother stayed awake all night, singing to her, just like any mother would do. Her father gave up his own blanket to keep her warm. When she cried from pain, they both cried too. Tell me, Colonel, how is that different from what your own parents would do?" Elizabeth could see cracks forming in Bradley's rigid thinking. He was looking at Little Bird now, really seeing her instead of just seeing Indian. Mahpia stepped forward and spoke directly to the colonel in perfect English. "Sir, I have worked as scout for Army for 3 years. I have seen battles and raids from both sides, but I have also seen white families and Indian families sitting around their fires at night, telling the same stories about love and loss, hope and fear. The hearts are the same color, no matter what the skin looks like." "You're trying to manipulate me," Bradley said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "We're trying to save lives," Morrison replied. "Both Indian and white. Colonel, if you attack that village today, you'll be killing children, just like Little Bird. And their deaths will bring revenge raids that could destroy every homestead within 100 miles. Elizabeth played her final card. "Colonel, what will you tell your own daughter when you go home? That you saved innocent children from violence? Or that you ordered their deaths because you were afraid to see them as human beings?" The room fell silent, except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. Little Bird said something softly in her own language, and her mother smiled for the first time since the shooting. "What did she say?" Bradley asked, almost against his will. Mahpia translated. "She said the white soldier has kind eyes, but they look very sad. She wonders if he misses his own little girl." Something broke in Bradley's expression. Elizabeth watched years of military hardness crack like ice in spring sunshine. He stared at Little Bird for a long moment, and she looked back at him without fear. "I miss her every day," he whispered. "Then help us make sure other fathers don't have to miss their daughters because of this war," Elizabeth said gently. Bradley sank into his chair behind the desk, suddenly looking older and more tired than his years. "What do you propose?" "A real peace treaty," Morrison said quickly, sensing the opening. "Not just a temporary ceasefire, but an actual agreement. The Ponca provides scouts and information about hostile tribes. In return, they get protection and fair treatment for their winter camps. The other settlers will object," Bradley said. "They want all Indians moved far away." "The other settlers want to live through the winter," Elizabeth countered. "Peaceful tribes like the Ponca know this land better than anyone. They can warn of bad storms, share hunting knowledge, even help with medical emergencies. They want to be partners, not enemies." Little Bird spoke again, her voice stronger now. Mahpia smiled as he translated. "She says she would like to be friends with the sad soldier's daughter. She thinks girls from different worlds would have much to teach each other." Bradley rubbed his eyes with both hands. When he looked up again, Elizabeth saw not the harsh colonel who had arrived yesterday, but a tired father who had been carrying too much fear and responsibility. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "I'm canceling the attack on the Ponca village. Instead, you will arrange a meeting with Chief Standing Bear to discuss terms for a mutual aid agreement." Relief flooded through Elizabeth like warm sunshine. Around the room, she saw the same emotion reflected in every face, even the Ponca parents, who might not have understood all the English words, but certainly understood the change in tone. "Elizabeth," Bradley said quietly, "what you did yesterday, treating this child when my own doctor refused, that took real courage." "It took basic human decency," she replied simply. "Something we all have, if we choose to use it." As the formal meeting broke up and arrangements were made for the peace negotiations, Elizabeth found herself standing with Mahpia by one of the fort's windows, watching the snow continue to fall across the endless prairie. "Do you think it will hold?" she asked. "This peace?" "Peace is like fire," Mahpia said thoughtfully. "It needs to be fed every day with understanding and respect. Stop feeding it, and it dies." "Then we better keep gathering kindling," Elizabeth smiled. Outside, the Nebraska Territory stretched white and clean to the horizon, ready for whatever new stories would be written across its vast expanse. But inside the fort, something precious had been born, the kind of understanding that could grow into lasting friendship if tended by people brave enough to see beyond their fears. Elizabeth touched the wooden bird pendant at her throat, remembering Mahpia's words about caged birds learning to fly. She had found something even better than flight. She had found her purpose in helping others discover the courage to build bridges instead of walls. In the years to come, people would tell the story of the settler girl and the Lakota scout who helped prevent a war through simple acts of compassion and truth. But Elizabeth knew the real story was quieter and more powerful. It was about choosing to see the humanity in others, even when everything around you screamed that they were your enemies. The carved bird caught the morning light streaming through the window, its tiny wings seeming to spread wide with possibility. And in that moment, Elizabeth understood that the greatest freedom wasn't found in flying away from your problems, but in staying to build the kind of world where everyone could soar.